Entry 28. Tonight I was sitting in my kiosk with my friend Luella when I put myself in a state of trance. My friend had fallen off to sleep because there were hardly any cars in the park and it seemed like no one would want to take their car out. It was about 3 in the morning and all the clubbers had vacated the car park and had driven home. Therefore, I decided to bring on a self-induced trance state. I was successful, and I actually felt myself dislodge, then lift up out of my body. I was happy, for it has been some time that I was fully conscious as I disconnected from my physical body. I had forgotten what an exhilarating experience it was. I was absolutely high from the event. I then thought to myself, where should I go? Then, I decided to fly in my astral body over the ocean and see if I could get to its opposite shore. I lifted up and began to fly, but before I could get to the shore to make my journey, I had to pass through some buildings that were in my path. I thought to myself, no bother, and as I passed through the walls with ease, I began to laugh, almost hysterically, at my control of the situation. I was just about to embark on my journey to France, and thinking to myself, today a foreign shore, tomorrow perhaps I could lift up into the stars and see how far that I could get. It was then that I felt myself awoken, and I was somewhat shocked, for I seemed to have complete control of the situation. I tell you, that kind of control is a rarity. It was then that I discovered why I had awoke. My friend had awoke from her sleep to see me choking or something, so she shook me awake so as I did not choke to death in my sleep. I was furious at her, but I could not moan too much, for she had awoken me for my protection. I told her when I had regained all my awareness of my experience, and that I was not choking, but was in fact laughing at my potential situation. She apologized and I said it was all right, but deep down I was angry and I wished that I were alone tonight. Anyway, there is always another day. I am optimistic that I will find myself in a similar situation in the future, if I do and my friend is with me. I made her promise that if she sees me choking, or whatever, to leave me be, even if I die it is worth the gamble. I have come to the realization, with the above experience, that even when I am out of my physical body, that I am somehow still attached to it. Perhaps this is the silver cord of which I have aforementioned in an earlier entry, which incidentally, I have still not seen or found, and as before, the reason being that I am just too curious, or excited about other things, that I forget to look. Entry 29. Yesterday night, when I was asleep at home, in my bed I found myself traveling down a vast stairwell. When I reached the bottom, there was doors that were locked. I could see on the other side of the doors a small group of security guards. I got their attention by shouting at them and gently, or should I say playfully, kicking the doors. I said to them that if they did not open the doors, that I would kick them open. They opened them and a small group of people who were with me walked through. The guards were not offended, they knew that we were having fun. Although I do not know my companions in the physical world, they seemed and felt as if we were familiar on, or in the astral planes. The next thing that I knew was that I could see a forest ahead of me. I was standing on what appeared to be an asphalt area, like a country car park site. There was a path that led through the forest, and it was muddy and on a hill. I found myself sliding down the hill through the forest, and I was full of joy and well-being. Then, I stopped for a moment and stood to the side, and as I waited I saw my present girlfriend slide on by, and she was laughing with absolute joy and pleasure. Up to this point, I had been conscious, but I was still caught up within the role play of the moment, not really thinking that I was awake on the astral planes. However, seeing my girlfriend awoke me to the fact that we were on the astral planes, and so I decided to catch her up and bring it to her attention. I began to slide down the path once more with the sole intention of catching her up and completing the above mission. When I got to the bottom of the hill, I saw her sitting on a stool at a continental bar. She was drinking wine from a tall glass, whilst talking to a man on her right-hand side. I got up from my sliding position and tapped her on the shoulder to acquire her attention to complete my task. She looked at me, and the next thing that we both knew was that we were lying awake in our bed, and that it was about 8 o'clock in the morning. Now, the first thing that she said when I brought it to her attention of what had just happened was that she had been dreaming of what I was telling her. She remembered the stairwell and the locked doors. However, the guards were not dressed up as guards for her. They were dressed as chefs. Although they were dressed as chefs and not guards, one can say that they were working men in uniform that opened the door. To add to this, she once had a 6'6" boyfriend who was a chef by trade, and she has often told me that she not only felt loved by him, but also protected. Therefore, she could have symbolically projected a chef's uniform onto the security guards because of her ex-boyfriend. Because she was not fully awake, she was spiritually sleepwalking. She did remember sliding down the forest path like an adolescent at the playground on a slide, and when I mentioned the man and her at the bar, she retorted with absolute surprise, "Wow! I was just dreaming that," just before I awoke. Later that day, both of us knew without a doubt that we had shared an astral or spiritual experience, and I do not think either of us will ever forget the reality of it. Entry 30. For this entry, I was at home in my bed when I caught myself dreaming of getting on a bus. What actually woke me this time was that a friend of mine, who I know in both worlds, got on the bus and I was left behind looking at my coins. Now, I am an avid coin collector, and I was suddenly shocked awake when I did not recognize the coins in my hand. Further, the coins were out and out fakes, and I found myself in a disposition wondering on how to pay the bus driver with these phony coins. The coins were not even half decent fakes, and I did not wish to embarrass myself by trying to deceive the driver. It was then, as I was overwhelmed with embarrassment and a burning desire to get on the bus with my friend, that I awoke. The next thing that I knew was that the bus driver had his back to me as he fiddled about with one of the seats of the vehicle. Therefore, I decided to bunk on the bus without his knowledge. I sneaked past him, and it was my good fortune that he did not look up. I could not see my friend anywhere on the lower level, and I figured that she must have gone up the stairs to the top. I did not want to gain attention, so I sat down on the nearest seat next to a large man. The man was pompous and had a bad attitude as well, and he began to complain, stating that he wanted the whole seat. I played the situation down and told him that there was enough room for the two of us. He did not like it, but he was victimized by my authority and just grunted his pompous reply. The bus driver fortunately did not notice the mini mayhem. He got up from what he was doing, went back to his seat, and began to drive the bus. When we neared the seafront in the popular place of the town, some people and I got up to vacate the bus. However, the bus driver was either unconscious of the fact or was adamant not to stop. Because the bus driver was refusing to stop, I suggested to the other passengers who wished to vacate that when he pulled up to an approaching roundabout, that we let ourselves off via the back fire escape door. They thought it was a good idea, and when the bus approached the roundabout, the bus driver slowed the bus and looked to his right so as not to have an accident. At this point, we all vacated the bus as I had suggested, and even managed to close the door behind us without a fuss. I did not even think of my friend's whereabouts as I strolled onto the beach, and for a time I fell back into an unconscious state. I began to surface when I found myself sitting on the beach with my mother and my brother. My brother had thrown some bread into the ocean, and my mother was moaning. My mother, I must add, died some months before this, but it was as if she was alive, and I did not question the why. or how that she could be present. A few nights prior to this I had seen her sitting with me and two of her still living sisters, and in that episode one stated that this must be a dream, knowing that she was dead. Then she replied, "No, this is not a dream, Jon. I am really here, you are awake." It was then that I knew that although she was physically dead, she was very much alive. She was dressed in a blue cardigan, and she seemed to sparkle or glow. However, this time it was periodical, as if it was a replay from the past. She began to curse at my brother for throwing the bread into the ocean, and that was something she would have done when we were all much younger. She took on a more passive and wise persona in her later years, and so it felt like a dream. It was then that I threw a stone at the bread, and I suddenly thought to myself that I might hit someone with the ricochet, or a lousy shot. Therefore, I decided to really take aim so as I would not miss. It was then that I awoke from the dream state again, as the rock that I threw bounced once, hit the bread and sunk it. I knew that the rock could not bounce, for it was an orb, not a disc, and the bread would not instantaneously sink, and it snapped me awake. My mother and my brother disappeared, but I was still on the beach. I got up and then I decided to explore the local environment. I exited the beach, crossed the main road and made my way into a church. When I got in there I noticed a cluster of televisions, and a group of people were sat around looking at the screens. What really puzzled me was that on the screens there was soft porn. Later, I decide that it is porn and other basic instincts and drives that the church represses from our nature in the name of the black arts. That is in the days of old, when the church was used as a social and political tool to help bond the social structures of civilization, before they invented the armies, police and judicial system. However, this did not come to me until I awoke physically, so I just sat down on one of the seats and pondered on why these churchgoers were watching soft porn. Then a woman sitting next to me showed me a body piercing, and it was then that I had the thought of trying to wake her in the plains spiritually. I looked straight into her face to hold her full attention, and then I asked her, "Do you know this town?" "No," she replied. "Is this Brighton?" I questioned. "I do not know." She retorted, "Is this the capital city?" I prompted, "I do not know." She replied, "Do you recognize it?" I asked, "I do not." She said. Then I decided to stop the folly and get straight to the point. I said, "This is the place that you go to when you sleep. Do you know that you are dreaming?" I did not wait for a reply, and I repeated the question. "Do you know that you are dreaming?" I then decided, having no joy with the questions, by telling her that she could awake. I said, "You are in a dream, come on, wake up." It was then that I began to fade from the room, like when one faints. I was in what appeared to be a halfway place between being physically awake and in my bed, and still being present in the church. I suppose you could call it an astral hyperspace. I did not want to awake, so I relaxed and tried to stop the transition. I managed to get back into the church, and when I was fully back in the room, I got up off of the seat and left the building. I decided to explore my surroundings and to make the most of this lucid spiritual state. When I was outside, I got onto a go-kart and began to pedal along a road that ran parallel with the seafront. I remember thinking to myself that the go-kart was a little too horizontal for my liking, and it was uncomfortable. The next thing that I knew, I was awake in my bed. Perhaps the horizontal feeling was as I was awaking in my bed, mixing with the experience. Entry 31. Tonight I found myself in a lucid dream state searching through Luella's flat for some art and symbolic literature. The writing was in fancy sign form like that of the ancients, or what you find in some poetry of old and new. I remember that as I entered the flat, that there was a shop below it with a display window front. Stairs ran up the side of the shop that brought one up to the above flat where my friend resided. I asked my friend how much she paid for her home, as she was renting it and I was curious. She told me that it was £6 and I was taken aback by the low cost. In real life I knew that flats were no longer that kind of price, unless one had an insane or rich eccentric landlord. I then found what we were looking for, and it was then that I awoke from the lucid dream state. Now, the reason I had suggested that it was a dream state was because it seemed like a dream, for although I was lucid it lacked the full conscious awareness that usually comes with the astral state. However, the next day my friend from the dream came to visit, and I happened to mention the lucidity of the dream. She was adamant that she had shared the same dream, and she could even tell me of the location of the flat in the dream and in the physical world. Which I must add is nowhere near where she actually lives in the physical world. I mean it is in the same town, but about 3 miles up the road. Therefore, it is most surprising that we shared the same dream. When I told her the price of the flat in the dream, she told me that she only has to pay £6 for her flat, in which she resides in her physical world. For she is a budding artist, and the government helped pay most of her rent so as she can pursue her dream. Of course, she is really unemployed and drawing benefits, but she will pay it all back in tax when she sells her first art, let alone the royalties from subsequent sales. Anyway, the paying of £6 objectified the dream, and as I had no way of knowing how much she and the government paid collectively, so the dream experience was shifting into an astral dream state. When she was awake the next morning before her visit, she was rummaging through her bedroom looking through some papers, when she came across some astrological literature that she wished to show me to validate astrology from a conversation that we had been having on its validity prior to the shared dream. She had stated that she had had her chart read by an astrologer that she had used in a magazine, and that even though he did not know her personally, that he seemed to know things about her life and personality. I had suggested that it was probably just coincidence, projection, and probability, so, getting back to the point in question, was it daily residue that led to a shared dream, or was it a meeting of souls on the astral planes? It does not add up, or fall in line, with daily residue, when one takes the price of the rent, and the location of the dream flat into account. Not forgetting of course the timing of the dream, for it had been a week and a half since her last visit, and that the conversation on astrology had taken place. To add to the validity of whether it was a dream, or an astral experience, she came up unexpectedly, for it was an off-the-cuff visit, for she had a lot to do that day. In addition, as I was not expecting her visit, there was a strong chance that I may not have been in to answer her call. Further, I did not know that she was seeking the document, and that she felt so positive that astrology was true. We both concluded that I had showed her where to find her lost document, with my spirit body on the astral planes, and that led to its retrieval the next morning. As for the validity of astrology, I will remain skeptical and open-minded, and who knows, perhaps one day I will give it another look. Entry 32. It has been some time since I made an entry into my diary, and between entries, I have once again accumulated quite a few astral experiences. Now, I will not go into detail of all these events, for I think that they are becoming a rather run-of-the-mill accounts. Therefore, I am just going to go into one event in detail. But before I do, I would just like to cap an overall view of the others for future consideration in this entry. I have found myself in gardens, fields, woods and forests, as much as I have found myself in different parts of the town and various buildings. I have found myself just out of my body and in what appears to be the physical world or environment. However, the other night I found myself sitting at a table in some kind of restaurant, although there was no food or beverages to be seen anywhere. The restaurant was large, like that you would come to expect at a mall of a large busy city. There were spirit people gathered at the tables and they were dressed in togas. The togas were white or light grey, but the people's ethereal skin differed. Some were white with a blue tint. Others were white and tinted purple, and some were pure white, and they appeared to glow like a fluorescent light. Then, all of a sudden the spirit people began to sing like a large choir, or should I say an orchestra, for their voices were more like musical instruments of some kind, although I could not say what kind of instrument that they emulated or sounded like. Further, they did not all sing at once, they seemed to perform some kind of orchestrated ethereal composition. I did not sing myself, I just observed, and although I did not know the song, it did seem to have a familiar ring to it. Either that, or it was just so pleasant that it sounded familiar. I must add that I felt completely at ease, or at peace within me, and that it was a most pleasant environment and experience. No one in the restaurant seemed to talk to me, although I am sure that they knew of my presence, for I somehow felt welcomed and not out of place, as if I belonged there. Anyway, to get to the point of all the experiences collectively, it seems as if when I am in different states of being or moods that I find myself in different locations and environments. It is as if it is I that transports me into these various locations. The spirit people and places seem to be at different levels. It is as if the spiritual environments are only populated with the same kind of spirit people. Now, I know that I have read this when I researched it objectively and logged it in an earlier entry. However, I had completely forgotten this, and I was reminded when I seemed to rekindle it subjectively. So it is then. If one's life is totally preoccupied with sensory pleasures, then one will probably find oneself in a chaotic spiritual plane or existence. However, if one is more into the clarification of the mind and the purification of the soul's journey, then one will probably find themselves somewhere in between the chaos junkies and the supernal restaurant. Taking the above into account, I now have another reason to do that what is politically and ethically correct within my physical world. Not only will I have a better environment and a happy mind and soul's journey, but also I will most probably frequent the restaurant or other such ethereal beauty spots more often. Entry 33. It has been a week since I last wrote, and I had no intention of adding any more entries. However, I felt that I had to add this entry because it is of great importance. Yesterday, when I was at home with my present girlfriend, the door buzzed. But we did not answer it, for we both had the flu and were not up to it. Also, it was not a code, and so we thought it was just people playing gingerbread. I give all my friends and family a special buzz code so as I do not fall victim to such goings on. We live on the 8th floor in the center of the town, so this happens quite often. So I give everyone a code and the problem does not affect us. The buzzer rung once only. We wondered who it could be, but as I said, we did not answer because all of the above. Later that night I found myself out on the astral planes once again, and I was semi-conscious. I was on a bus with my friend Jane and her child and my late mother, who had crossed over a few months ago. When we got down to the town center, my friend Jane vacated the bus, leaving the child with my mother and myself. I looked for Jane and even waited for her to arrive at the next stop. I had got off knowing that she had got off without her child, and I thought that she would rectify the situation by catching us up on foot. When I got off of the bus, I lost my mother somehow. We walked over to a taxi rank so as I could take him back home. It was then that I saw my brother-in-law Don. We talked and he was going to give me a lift. He is a taxi driver. Shortly after that I awoke. The next day, I had to go to the doctor's to have a blood test, and it was after the blood test, when I was in the supermarket obtaining some food, when the customer in front of me was taking his time at the kiosk to fill his bags in the queue, when the cashier made a comment. On his indolence, he lifted his sleeve and showed a small padded plaster on his arm. He stated that he was not well because he had given blood. I said snap and showed him an identical padded plaster on the same arm, only it was mine. The only difference was that he had given blood and I had had a blood test. Later it dawned on me that my friend Jane, who I have not seen for some time, except on the astral planes last night, and that was more or less a one-off, for I have not seen her in either the physical or astral world for a while. Then I thought that my friend Jane always visits me when she gives blood, which is done in a van near my flat's location, and only comes once every 3 months for 2 days or so. I put 2 and 2 together, and of course, she had probably dreamt or sleepwalked with me on the astral planes because of daily residue. It was most probably her that rang the buzzer, and to top that, she only ever presses the buzzer once. I have given her a 321 code, but somehow she never uses it. Because I haven't seen her for some time, I overlooked that it could be her. Further, she would have had to change her bus at that precise location where she had got off of on the astral planes if she was to dream herself changing buses to get to her workplace, which she does habitually 5 times a week in the physical world. Even further, I had had an astral experience the night prior to the above experience, where I had heard a familiar female voice call my name, and the location was outside the very same supermarket that I mentioned above. I had disclosed this enigma to my current girlfriend, and we were both mystified as to who it could have been. This was all a bit too coincidental to be just plain coincidence, right down to the blood test, which I did not know until I was behind the sluggish customer in the queue at the supermarket. Then it struck me like a hammer. If all that had happened and was as I had seen it, then there was proof of life after life, for my late mother was with us, as I have mentioned. This leaves me with no doubt in my mind that my mother is alive and well, and even accompanying me on the astral planes. Entry 34. Last night, I was out of my body and in a strange house full of people who I seem to know, although in my physical life they have no place or relevance. In short, I do not know or remotely recognize them at all from my physical world or senses. Anyway, in this house was just the opposite. It was as I have stated before in similar experiences, not as if I had a memory of their or our joint pasts or paths. It was very much in the now. In short, I felt a familiarity with the spirit people's personalities. Perhaps they could have been soul group mates that work with me in the light, or from past lives. Alternatively, it could have been carried over from a dream that I was having before I spiritually awoke. Anyway, back to the experience. I was in this room looking at a model of an obelisk on a table when suddenly it disappeared from my view. An elderly, peaceful-looking lady was accompanying me, or directing me. She told me to sweep my hand across the area where the obelisk was before it disappeared. I tried to feel where the obelisk was and it was not there. I waved my arm right through it, and if it was invisible it would have tipped over with my action. It was plainly not just out of my view. It was not there. The old lady led me to a window that I thought was facing south. She told me to look outside and I saw the sun, although it did not appear to be the real sun, for I would have been blinded. Perhaps it was the sun's essence. I do not know, for it could have been some kind of spiritual tool. However, after a time, I could feel a transformation occurring in my mind and sight. It was more of a feeling and a strange sense of awakening, not like opening my eyes when I am in the physical, not like that follows sleep, but perhaps in the way that is felt or sensed with enlightenment. Anyhow, when I stopped looking out of the window, then faced to look back into the house and room, I could see the model of the obelisk on the table where it was in the room once more. I felt, when I awoke physically, that the woman was an instructor of some sort, and that she was helping me to have lucidity in and on the astral planes when I am out and about. She was teaching me not to confuse the two awakenings, to awake on the astral planes or in my physical being. She taught me to open my mind, not my eyes, otherwise I will physically awake on my office chair. Further, I felt that it was the obelisk had left our dimension when we were at the table, but it was a dimensional shift when we were at the window. I felt that the same mental technique that could keep me awake on the planes, once harnessed, could also be used to cross over into alternate astral worlds too. Entry 35. Last night I found myself dreaming that I was with a young lady hovering and moving along as if we were in some kind of vehicle. As we were traveling along in the direction of my workplace. For I was aware that I was on my way to work. We passed through a bus shelter, and I asked the young lady if she noticed that we were floating along, and she gave the affirmative. And I went on to ask if she noticed that we had passed through the bus shelter like a hot knife through butter, and again she gave the affirmative. Then I began to waffle to her and myself at the same time, saying that in this life we pick up love and give kindness to ourselves and others. Then at death we cross over into the light, and if we have collected enough of the above, that we don't have to come back down to collect more. And then I awoke on my office chair. Entry 36. I got to thinking, are the astral planes manifestations of our spiritual minds? Do we create our clothes, buses and buildings like we do in our dreams? Do we weave our daytime environments into the planes and then on into the afterlife at our crossing after death? I realized that the answers that I sought were summed up in that. Life for us is, of course, about reaching our godhood. Its path is found within community spirit in the guise of virtuosity, love, kindness, forgiveness, empathy and compassion, in which we must partake in order to find spiritual peace and harmony to take from this world to the next. Entry 37. Then I got to questioning that if there are souls that are made by God, along with the heavens and the earth, of whether angels really do exist, and if so, what was their sole purpose? I found that there are several authors on Mind, Body, Spirit on Google and YouTube that write or speak about them and their spiritual influences. They go on to write that they come down to warn us of danger, or whisper in our ears to tell us to call someone on the phone, or even that someone is going to give us a call. They can enter our dreams, or in meditation, or even whisper their messages into our minds when we are doing menial tasks, like when we are working on a factory floor, daydreaming, or driving our car. They say that the angels can have wings like the Bible dictates, or they can be seen as beautiful tall ethereal beings, or even as regular guys. It is all down to what you want, or expect to see, I suppose. when we get help or have a spiritual experience. It is sometimes the case that a single white feather will show up out of the blue to signify that the angels or spirit are there with us, or watching over us. It has been witnessed throughout history that when some people are lost or terrified, that they have seen what is known as the third man come into their focus. Basically, people who have been lost at sea or on land have seen this third man just in sight, in the near distance, guiding them when on land, or accompanying them when lost at sea, until they are either found or are in familiar territory, and people who are terrified, like caught in an inferno, like a burning building, are guided out of their terrifying ordeal by a caring stranger, and in both cases, as soon as they are safe, the third man disappears completely, leaving no trace, just rescue and memories. I was reading a book just the other day about the third man hypotheses and or angel experiences, and in it there was a man who was sailing solo in his yacht around the world who got food poisoning. Then a stranger suddenly appeared out of the blue and steered the yacht while he was sick and unable to do so himself, and disappeared once he was better. Then there was a mountaineer that had been caught up in an avalanche and was hurt and had broken his ankle. His teammate went off to get help and left him alone. When he was alone, he saw a stranger in the near distance sitting on a rock, and he called out to him and even chucked rocks at him to gain his attention. But to no avail. After that, his ankle got infected and he went into a fever, and the stranger got closer to him. The more ill the mountaineer got, the closer he got also, until he was in touching distance from his feet, and as sudden as he arrived, he disappeared just before the rescue team turned up. Then there was a person who was caught up in 9 to 11 and was in perilous danger, when suddenly a caring stranger appeared and got him to walk through a burning doorway. The person would not have gone through the doorway usually because of the flames, but because the stranger was so confident that they should do so, he did, and he was able to get out of the building alive. Further, to give these angel experiences more structure, I must say that I read another tale from another book also the other day, and it was about a small child that fell over on a main road and was run over by a truck. The truck driver felt the impact as the wheels traveled over the child, and he vomited in shock and horror at the thought. There was a policeman standing by witnessing the event, and he thought that the child should be dead from the accident too. When the parents talked to her in hospital of where she was taken hastily, they were somewhat taken aback when she opened her eyes and asked where the person was that had stroked her face, giving her both comfort and assurance of her safety, and at the same time lifted the wheels of the truck over her body so as she would suffer no harm. She said quite innocently and naively, "Where is that beautiful person that was dressed in white?" When she was checked for injuries in the hospital, she only had a small bruise on her back from the accident. It is quite clear that although only the girl could see the spiritual being, that being had somehow taken on the form of the physical world and had a superior strength, which is self-evident because of the child's rescue. Angels can turn up in your dreams to give you inspiration or spiritual guidance. I often dream of angels who are beautiful and exceptionally tall, who hug me and even kiss me and then leave me feeling dizzy. Then when I awake, I write a story or a song. There have also been times when I am woken up from my sleep by a female voice calling my name, and then my mobile phone rings or someone presses my doorbell. They can also protect us from harm by appearing as a mysterious stranger who beam in, saves us, and then beam out, like what happens with the third man hypotheses above. I myself have had a similar experience. I once crossed the road blindly in a busy part of the city, and I was nearly run over by a bus. The only reason that I wasn't hit was because I felt a push in my chest that pushed me backwards out of harm's way just in time. The bus was a few inches from brushing my nose as it passed by, and if I had not been pushed back I surely would have died, because I would have been in its direct path, and the driver could not have seen me soon enough to brake in time. I could not see anyone. The being, or angel, was invisible to the naked eye, but they were definitely there watching out and looking after me. I must finish with one last story before I bore you all to death with my angelic tales. Basically, I and my current girlfriend often find money either in our paths, when walking in the street, and even have money turn up in her purse and my wallet from time to time, when we are in need of it. When I say money, I am talking about 40 quid or more. Not just a few quid that could have been overlooked or mislaid and then unexpectedly found. I know that you could and probably be thinking that not all of these could be down to angelic intervention. But I believe that they are, and because of it my world is both mysterious and magical, and as I have already said, I feel loved, watched over and protected. Entry 38. To conclude my entries, I must write 5 dream metaphors that I should have put in a couple of months back when I had them. But I did not. For I thought that I would save them until my final entry, because I felt like they were esoteric, and that they would be perfect for my finale and for you to ponder on. Last night, I dreamt that it was New Year's Eve, and I was over the park with my niece in the snow, when my great niece walked out into the road and got run over and was killed by a car. The next thing that I knew, I was interviewing a young lady of approximately 20 years of age about life after life. She met Jessica, my niece, and found out that her daughter had died, and she gave her condolences. After Jessica had thanked her and gone, I told her that Livy's tragic death had taught us that there was a destiny, and that we must get on with our plans and accomplishments in this life before it was too late, because we know and believe in near-death experiences and of life beyond the physical planes. We knew that Livy was still alive and in safe hands, and that she will be there waiting to meet us when we cross over. I then became very lucid in the dream, and I told the girl whom I was interviewing about it. In short, I said that I was dreaming and that she was in my dream, and that I believed that she was dreaming too, and that I was in hers. I then took the pad that we had been using for the interview on Life After Life and asked for her name and telephone number so that I could call her when we awoke. She gave me the name, but with no number, and I realized that she was too freaked out by the situation to give me her real name and number, and then I awoke in my bed. I told my current girlfriend about the dream and my nearly getting the young lady's phone number and name for confirmation and objectivity, and she said that she appreciated it that I hadn't. She said this: I believe that our lives could do without the extra complications. I am not sure if this experience was a vivid dream or if it was an astral experience, because I did not get the girl's number to objectify it in my waking world. On top of that, although there is snow up north, there is no snow down here like there was in the dream, and it is not New Year's Eve either. Further, I usually get a strange feeling with precognitive dreams or premonitions when I awake, which I did not, and last but not least, thankfully Livy has not been run over and killed. Not yet anyway, and I do not believe that she will, although I will text my niece later and tell her to be aware of any danger that could come to her child over the next few days, especially if it snows. I do feel that this was an astral dream experience mixed up with dream material, so I believe that I was out and about on the astral planes sleepwalking, and the lesson of the dream was about our fulfilling before it was too late our soul's purpose and destiny, and no matter what happens in this life, that we are in the safe arms of spirit on both the physical and spiritual sides of creation. Cakes from heaven. Last night, I had a vivid dream where I was in suburbia at Moleskine, just up from the school, where I entered an elevator that took me to a hypermarket, where I saw my late mother baking cakes in an old-fashioned range in a bakery shop. She walked over to me with some freshly baked cakes in hand, and she insisted on me eating them. I said to her that I was lactose and wheat intolerant, and that they would be like poison, but she insisted that these cakes would cause me no harm, so I took her word and I ate them. Then, as I was about to leave, she gave me some to go with, and I took them and then said goodbye. When I was in the elevator, I began to think of my sister Lori, and then I awoke on my office chair. I immediately thought about when my mother crossed, when everyone was sharing her belongings, that I had only taken her cookbook with all her favorite recipes in it for memorabilia. I had often said to her when she was alive that she should get it published, but she never got around to it. Now, my sister Lori works in an old people's home, and she had recently changed her job position to cook, and because of this I had lent her the cookbook, because she was cooking for geriatrics, and the recipes would be nice for them and convenient for my sister to get them straight from the book. Basically, I took it that the dream, where I was thinking of Lori, with cakes in hand in the lift, was the dream's way of telling me to get the cookbook back from my sister. So the next day I put out a message throughout the family that I wanted the cookbook back, but to no avail. After a time I went to see my other sister Alison at her flat for an afternoon tea, and Lori was there having tea too. Seeing her there, I asked her directly for the book back, and then I proceeded to tell her why. As I began to tell her of the dream, where I had got to the bit where I had been given the cakes from the old-fashioned range, I could see her stir in her seat, and when I got to the bit where I was thinking of her in the lift with the cakes that our late mother had given me in hand, she could hold herself back no more. She burst out with, that when our mother was near her crossing, that they had made a pact that after her crossing, that she would somehow give my sister some freshly baked cakes that had been cooked from an old-fashioned range. Upon hearing this, I realized that the reason for me thinking of her with cakes in hand that our mother had given me was to tell her that the cakes were for her to fulfill the pact that she had made with our mother on this side of the veil, to validate that she had successfully crossed and that she was alive and well. The cancer that had taken her was completely gone, and she was both happy and content baking the cakes in the bakery's range. The department store. Last night, I was told by my late mother that the secrets to life and the universe is that it's like a department store, and that you begin your journey by working on the bottom floor running errands, delivering the mail and making the tea for others, and then you work your way up through the departments and up the floors until you eventually get to the top and you become one of the bosses and run the whole store. After that, you become familiar at being one of the bosses, you leave the store and get your own department store, and from then on you run that one instead. I just thought that I would tell the metaphor first, and then tell of the actual events of the astral dream experience. When I saw my mother, we were living in a house just up the road from where Cakes from Heaven came from. She actually said that once you get to the top and become one of the bosses, that you go back to the beginning and begin again. I corrected her and said that you leave and get your own store, and although she didn't agree, she accepted my view. I think that she was talking about reincarnation, and that we had somehow got our wires crossed, whereas I was talking about the journey from the spiritual pilgrim to the divine. The astral dream experience carried on where I was in a room on my own, and I saw these angels outside the window looking in at me, and one came up to the open window and gave me a high five, letting me know that it was a good metaphor. The angels had no wings, but they were flawless, perfect, symmetrical, tall, beautiful and ethereal, and I instantly recognized them as angels. Another one sang to me to wake me up so as I could write it down, but I only awoke in the dream, not on the office chair. I clapped her and said that she had a beautiful voice, and she acknowledged me and gave me a warm, loving smile. Then I saw a friend of mine called Barry, and he tried to get me to record it on a tape, but there was talking on the tape. Basically, it was not a blank tape, and then I awoke on my office chair, and I got up and looked at the time, and it was 3 a.m. And then I wrote it down. The guest house. Tonight I found myself at a guest house in the light, and it was run by my late mother. When she was on this side of the veil, she had left the civil service to become a housekeeper at a small hotel in her later years, and she had a dream of having and running her own. So I guess that in the light, she had finally achieved what was truly in her heart. In the guest house were my brothers Sean, Brian, my niece Honey, and my sister Georgina. It was strange, because I had a dream within the astral state, and it was very vivid. In the dream, there was a man who was painting the guttering to the guest house, and we left him to it, and when we went back to check on his progress, he had taken some trees out of the ground, roots and all, and some of the veranda's roof, which was attached to the side of the building, and we were all furious. Then, the next day a hurricane came, and if they were there they would have damaged the building, and my mother would have had to shut down the guest house for repairs. The day after, he came back and we thanked him, and then he began to paint the inside hall, and again we left him to it. When we got back, he had fallen asleep, and he had removed his trousers, and we noticed that they were torn. My mother decided, as she was doing some sewing for me, for she was sewing my jacket, that she would repair them for him, and as she finished he awoke, and he thanked her, and then he abruptly got up and lifted her off of the ground by her shoulders and violently shook her. At first she was taken aback, when he placed her firmly back on her 2 feet. Then she realized that she had had a slight pain in her back, that she had had for some time, that was now gone, and she thanked him. After that she asked if he was an angel, because he looked immaculate, kind and wise, and he said that he was, and she asked him to watch over me and to make sure that I had a good life, and that I would always be okay, and he said that he would, and then he left the establishment. I re-awoke in the astral state and found myself back in the guest house frantically searching for some paper or a computer to write the dream down, but to no avail. Now, it was getting late, and everyone had to go to bed so as they could get up for work in the morning, and so for now I was not alone. There was Beatrice, Mike, our close friend, and myself that had to leave. However, every time that I left I found myself back in the guest house with my family. I tried several times to leave and even got halfway up the road, and then I found myself back at the guest house once more, and eventually my family were getting rather frustrated with me. In the end they all went to bed regardless of if I had actually left or stayed, all except my mother, who stayed awake, and I sat down with her and said that when I leave that she must not think of me, for this was bringing me back. Because all the while she did I couldn't catch up with my friends and go home to my flat. Next I told her that although she thinks that she is on earth and alive and running her guest house, that she was in fact within eternity. She took a while to actually take it in, but in the end, because of the strange things that were happening, like me being able to teleport back to her every time I left the guest house, when she thought of me she gave way and agreed with me that she could not be on earth. Then I told her about the angel and the dream, and she pondered on its meaning, and then she said that it was a fantastic dream, and I said goodbye and left, and after that I found myself awake on my office chair. Rachel. Last night, I fell asleep on the office chair, and I dreamt that I was in an old-fashioned Victorian building where there were secret corridors, halls within halls, and hidden courtyards. I watched some ethereal burlesque dancers perform a jazzy art ceremony. Then a slim, tall, dark, ringlet-haired woman with a china doll face and an air of sophistication and an ethereal glow came up to me and said, "Hello. I'm Rachel. When you are talking to your spirit guide, you are talking to me." Then she walked away and stood in the reception. I walked up to her and asked her, "If you are Rachel, tell me what I am thinking. How are you?" She asked. I told her that she was wrong. I said that I was thinking, "How do you do?" Then I asked, "What am I thinking now?" Of which she gave no reply, and I said, "Willy Wonka's Chocolate Factory." And she seemed irritated with me and she walked away. Firmly, but calmly, through a corridor that was the exit of the building, and as she left I said to her, "Do yourself a favor. If you are going to say that you are my spirit guide, at least have the decency to know what it is that I am thinking." Then I went upstairs to a room and I saw my mother on a chair sleeping. I kissed her forehead and bid her good night. After that I awoke on my office chair. When I was awake, I knew that I had seen both my spirit guide and my mother. I must add that I was a little, or in truth a lot, embarrassed at how I treated Rachel, and can only apologize to her from my conscious state of my stupid behavior and ill-begotten mannerisms, and say that it must have been the workings of my subconscious or semi-conscious mind. I think that in the 21st century that most people, when searching for God, use a search engine like Google and breeze through the mind, body and spirit websites, taking a little from each as they create their own assumptions or belief system. Ironically, I think that the answers have been there all along for all to see. It's in the stages of gestation in the womb, and it is in the evolutionary spiritual stages of the chakras from base to crown for the spiritual progression towards godhood or perfection. Let's presume from this that we all have souls which have come from God. As we entered spirit, we oscillated between spirit and earth, and then we progressed back into the light, where we evolved on up through spirit. We eventually leave the light behind for the void. After that we help to create the multiverse, as we create life from love and love from life to feed the gods and ourselves. For at the end of the day, are we not all gods? Thanking you. Jon Dunn. Joe looked up at the clock, and he noticed that it was 4:30 in the morning. He wrapped the silk cloth back around the book, then placed the diary into his locker, for he noticed that although John's spiritual exploits had come to an end, when he turned the page he saw that someone else had added their own entries to the diary, and the title was headed, Lewis. He quickly flipped through the pages, and he could see that he did not have enough time to read and complete it tonight. So he decided that he would read it tomorrow, because there were no cars in the car park, and he still had about an hour left, and all that reading had made him a bit tired. He decided to have a little snooze until he was relieved by the worker of the next shift. The next thing he knew, he was being awakened by his relief, and it was time to go home. He took off his work overalls, got dressed in his normal non-working attire, said goodnight to his workmate, and headed off home to have some breakfast and some well-deserved bed rest.